Back with Forbes media editor-in-chief Steve Forbes, Forbes magazine contributor Bruce Japsen, and Independent Women's Forum's Patrice Onwuka. Good to see you all. Steve, Japan, we already have Mexico and Canada excluded, right, at least until they finish the NAFTA negotiations. Now if we have Japan and Europe, who's left? I don't think there are going to be many left, right?
Yeah, we've got South Korea, Brazil, and some others. But I think what this goes to show, David, is that this broad tax was not going to work in terms of doing with trade abuses. And I hope the whole lesson of this is that we focus on real trade abuses with China and their mercantilist policies and not end up shooting up our allies.
Bruce, it's kind of a strange situation. You usually end up supporting or siding with unions on situations like this. In this case, the unions support what President Trump has been doing with regard to tariffs. What do you feel on this?
Well, I mean, some of them do. I talked to some steelworkers union this week, and they were saying, you know, that some of this could, they're worried about, their soundbite is that the steel is not of high quality. So it seems like you could solve that through a trade agreement over a tax. And one of the things that even the steelworkers or others aren't understanding is that, you know, we export a lot of steel. And so you could, and this whole thing that Trump is doing could backfire, and that wouldn't be good.
Well, and Patrice, it could backfire also because so many workers involved in manufacturing are using steel, and they're going to have to pay more. It's not only the consumers that are going to end up paying more, but it's some people could lose their jobs. Some workers working with steel who will have to pay more, and maybe some of those companies will have to lay workers off.
I mean, the 2002-2003 steel tariff is a great case study in what happens when you institute a tariff. 200,000 American jobs in steel-using industries were lost, and some of these jobs were lost in some really key states that President Trump won. So I think history tells us that these are not a very good idea. Is it important for us to have very strong trade agreements that, you know, that don't put the United States at a disadvantage? Absolutely. Right. But we don't want to abandon free trade and the benefits that it provides for our country.
And I think, Steve, what we have seen over the past couple of days, when the president has rolled back a lot of these, a lot of the real toughness on the tariffs. When it first came out, they were saying, all his advisors saying no exemptions at all. Well, now there are several exemptions, and there may be more. I think the president is realizing that, and he is dialing back the whole process, no?
Well, that's right. And then talking about jobs, the steel industry employs 140,000, construction industry 6.3 million, American manufacturing companies 6.5 million, 13 million versus 140,000. There are better ways to deal with this kind of situation. And as has been pointed out, we've seen this movie before, not only with George W. Bush, but with Ronald Reagan. Right. He learned the hard way that you end up doing more harm than good.
Well, and Bruce, in fact, we mentioned the jobs numbers being responsible, at least in part, for the incredible 400-point gain on the Dow yesterday. Some of it, though, was also because the president has pulled back a little bit on the tariffs, right?
Well, he could, but I think one of the problems is that, like this policy, like so many of them, the immigration and so forth, he is either not seeking advice getting the advice of his advisors, or it's just so scattershot and he doesn't really understand. And then finally there is a market reaction, and that is one thing that he does understand apparently. And then he reverses course, and so it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it does anger our allies, and that's not good.
Well, Patrice, it depends on which advisor he's talking to. Of course, Gary Cohn, who's leaving the White House, or at least that position, the economic position in the White House, was against the tariffs, and that may be one reason why he left. The president made it absolutely clear in his campaign that he was for tariffs, that he thought that we had signed all kinds of bad trade deals, and as you mentioned before, Patrice, we have, and over time, by the way, the NAFTA deal has changed even more favorable towards Mexico against us. So things need to be tweaked, and maybe this is just a process of tweaking that we're in right now.
I mean, it is. Talking about his advisors, though, it would be interesting to see who is going to be appointed to that position. You know, if you have someone who's going to be not a free market, more of a nationalist perspective, then we might see more of these types of tariffs, or maybe we'll see some changes to monetary policy, which also deals with the trade deficit, and that's something that President Trump wants to deal with. What is interesting, though, when you go back to what he wrote about and talked about in the 2000s, he wants to be negotiator in chief, and so he will probably be taking a very active role role in the trade agreements that
Well, let's hope so.
we sign
He knows how to make a deal. Steve, have you been hearing anything? Because some of the nominees include vast differences. I mean, people like Larry Kudlow, who's a big free trader, kind of against any kind of tariffs anytime, to somebody like Navarro, who is one of the guys, the chief inventor of these tariffs.
Yes, that's right, and that's why this appointment is going to be so critical. I don't think the president's made up his mind yet as who's going to fill that post, but that's going to be a signal. Is he want to get new agreements, or are we going to descend to what nobody wants into a trade war? That's why the next 15 days, David, are going to be so critical.
Would you take the job?
David.
That's not a no, Steve. That's not a no. It's a serious question.
Well, I'm flattered, but no, I'd rather be talking with you on Saturday.
Okay. All right. Well, who do you think, Bruce? I mean, because you are more favorable to the position of tariffs, who do you think? Do you think it should be a free trader or somebody like Navarro, one of the people who created the tariffs?
Well, I do think that it would be good that we had somebody. I mean, Steve would be good. He has the ability to communicate, and I don't agree with Larry Kudlow, but Larry Kudlow has the ability to communicate. And this was kind of the final humiliation for Gary Cohn. I mean, we thought he was going to leave when he was upset about the what Trump said after the Charlottesville neo-Nazi parade, and now he's going. I don't think he's going to get to go back to Goldman Sachs because he wasn't rising to the CEO job there. So. He was ineffective. So I think what Trump needs is somebody to be able to communicate what he's trying to do.
Patrice, you have 15 seconds. Who do you think the nominee should be or will be?
I do hope it's somebody who's more of a free market-oriented person.
Okay. All right. Very
My
good.
choice is Larry Kudlow.
Larry Kudlow.
Put that on the record.
All right. My
good
choice
on
is
TV.
Steve Forbes. I hope Steve Forbes is offered the job. All right. Steve is shaking his head. No, I don't want to. Well, meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi appears to be trying to pick up the crumbs from her controversial comment about tax cuts being crumbs.